CNN's panel absolutely torched two MAGA defenders after they tried defending Trump's massive taxpayer-funded plan that could financially reward January 6 rioters, including people convicted of attacking police officers. Subscribe to the channel, comment where you're watching from, and let me know whether you think this proposal crosses a dangerous line. The panel completely unloaded on two MAGA defenders after they tried to justify Donald Trump's outrageous new $1.766 billion anti-weaponization fund, a taxpayer-backed compensation system that could reward January 6 defendants, including people convicted of assaulting police officers during the Capitol attack. The discussion immediately turned explosive when former DOJ officials and legal analysts pointed out that many of these cases were lawfully prosecuted, upheld in court, and had nothing to do with political persecution. But despite that, Trump's allies are now trying to reframe January 6 rioters as victims deserving restitution from the American public. Things got even worse for Republicans when the panel highlighted the absurd contradiction at the center of the proposal. Capitol police officers who suffered lasting trauma and injuries from January 6th may receive nothing, while some of the very people responsible for attacking them could potentially receive financial compensation overseen by a commission handpicked by Donald Trump himself. And as the conversation unfolded, even some conservative voices on the panel admitted the entire process looked deeply corrupt, unconstitutional, and completely beyond the bounds of normal government behavior. Stay tuned, because I've got some strong thoughts about the hypocrisy and corruption concerns that completely took over this.
And good evening to you. I'm Jessica Dean in for Abby Phillip tonight. The most brazen act of presidential corruption this century. That's what two officers are calling Justice Department's new $1.8 billion fund for victims of alleged weaponized prosecution. In this new lawsuit, former Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn and D.C. Metropolitan Police Officer Daniel Hodges claim that fund endangers them personally and is a violation of the Constitution. Nearly 1,600 people charged in connection with the attack could apply for compensation, and that includes people who assaulted officers that day. Both Dunn and Hodges say they continue to get threats. They argue the fund would, quote, compensate and empower the very people making those threats. They say it signals, quote, to past and potential future perpetrators of violence against them that they need not fear prosecution. To the contrary, they should expect to be rewarded. And they both spoke to CNN today. Here's what they said. President Trump defended the need for the fund today.
So the anti-weaponization of people, I mean, people were destroyed. They went to jail. Their families were ruined. They committed suicide. You know, all the Biden administration and the Obama administration, both of them. I mean, the Obama administration started it. We're reimbursing those people for their legal fees and for their costs and for anybody involved. You know, it was the most violent thing I've ever seen in politics, what they did. But we think that anybody involved in that process should partake. And you're talking about peanuts compared to the value. It destroyed the lives of many, many people.
So we now have those lawsuits we were just talking about. We also heard from Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill today. I'm joined now by all of our guests here at the table. I do want to play a quick clip from several Republican lawmakers who were questioning this DOJ fund. Here's what they said.
I will tell you, my first reaction was this doesn't pass the smell test.
It sends a signal, hey, go breach the Capitol, destroy the building, assault police officers, and you may even get compensated for someday. That's absurd.
We got to unpack exactly what it is, what the source of the funding is, in order to stop it and or reverse it. Right?
So you want to stop it?
Oh, 100%.
And we welcome everyone here at the table. Sochi, I want to start with you because you spent some time at DOJ, and this idea that they prosecuted so many of these people, and now this idea that there would be this fund to compensate some of these people, and that it's going to be left up, Todd Blanche says, to this kind of arbitrary group of people that they're going to decide that the president can get rid of anytime he wants. Yeah. It's a remarkable thing.
It's completely shocking. And I was there when they were prosecuting these cases, and it was a top priority for the administration. And I will note is that while President Trump continues to talk about how the last Justice Department weaponized the government and prosecuted these people, it's just absolutely not true. If you look at the cases themselves, they were all brought, all these cases were brought And none of them, even when they were on appeal, were acquitted by. They were not acquitted by a jury, and they did not. They ended up moving forward. So the fact that people are talking about how the Justice Department weaponized these cases is absolutely ridiculous. The other thing I'll know about Todd Blanche is he is not only the president's personal attorney, but he has no business being involved in a settlement of this matter. He should have recused himself. CNN had reporting last week that talked a little bit about how he had been, they had recommended that he recuse himself by top career Justice Department officials, and he didn't do that. And I know that when he was talking to Paula Reed, it evidently came up about how he was the one who essentially signed off on some of this stuff. So it's concerning overall, and my hope, and the only solution to this is for Congress to act.
Okay, but there were some of these cases, January 6th, there were some very bad actors. There's no doubt about that. But there were other people who, if you look at the entire federal system throughout the United States of America, who got punished in a way that was much more harsh than typically people. I mean, besides there was a handful of people who did horrible things, but the majority of them was trespass. It was trespass. The majority was they went somewhere where they weren't supposed to go. That's a crime.
No, they were part of a mob. They were part of a mob.
But that's no, that's an incredible statement. Look, I'm just look
that they just went somewhere like they went to the local 7-Eleven.
But I'm talking about the law.
I'm talking about the capital of the United States.
Listen, I think it was the worst day in American history. So 9/11 was the worst day in American history. But this is a horrible, horrible day. I'm not defending what happened that day. I'm being a lawyer. I'm not talking about the politics. Okay. I'm talking about what they were charged with and what their ultimate sentences were. There were people who were held in solitary confinement for trespass. There were people who killed themselves in prison over this. And the president has the
January 6th
the person who's written a lot about mass incarceration, when I look across all of the ways that the Justice Department has punished people who did not deserve to be punished, put them in solitary confinement, all the things. Do you think that this group of people deserves $1.8 billion?
No, but I don't think it's limited to this group of people. As far as I know, I think Biden's son could go and ask for this, say, hey, I was targeted by the Justice Department. I need my money back.
How was he targeted? Hold on. How was he targeted by the Justice Department?
I'm not saying it would be a viable claim, but I don't think the way I read the press release, it's just for January 6th.
You don't see this as obscene. I see it as absolutely obscene.
No. I would agree with the first senator. It's a little beyond the pale of normalcy. How about that?
We go back one step, because this is a perfectly good debate about why would you pay money to people who are convicted criminals. There is a system already to deal with those issues. But let's just talk about the fact that we have a quote-unquote settlement for $1.8 billion. Let's leave aside that it's collusive, because the plaintiff and the defendant are the same person.
Yeah, that's not typical.
But then so one of the reasons you know it's collusive is not just that they're the same party. Donald Trump himself said, when he brought the case, saying, I know this is odd because I'm on both sides. But let's look at the merits of the case. The merits of the case were, and this was in front of the federal judge who had it in Florida, was that there was no case. The reason the IRS general counsel quit is obvious, because the IRS is defending the IRS, the public, for the same type of violations and claims that are made by Donald Trump. But here, when it's Donald Trump, they pay out the money. The clear way that this case should have been dismissed is it was not brought timely. It was supposed to be made within 2 years. Do you know how much money that means that the public would owe Donald Trump? Zero. And zero is a lot less than $1.8 billion.
It's not Donald Trump who's getting the money, correct?
But that's irrelevant.
Oh, well.
Because the money is styled. The money is styled.
Some people have argued
it's not going in his
that
pocket.
it's
That's
his
different
allies
than him not
that
getting
he's
it.
able to then reward allies. What do you think about that with the $1.8 billion?
Well, again, according to the fund, the way it's written is it's not supposed to go to Donald Trump's allies. It's going to be a process. There's going to be people appointed by, I think, members of Congress, members of the executive branch.
The vice president stood up on stage and said that all the people who haven't gotten any sympathy were the people who had stormed the Capitol and voted for Donald Trump. The vice president was saying that these were going to be Trump voters and people who stormed the Capitol for him.
On the question of who this would be, we do have a clip from Todd Blanche talking to CNN today about who this would be and if it would be people who assaulted cops. This is what he said.
One of the factors the commissioners have to consider is what the claimant did, the claimant's conduct, okay? So in the hypothetical you just described, the claimant would have to say, I assaulted a cop and I want money. So whether the commissioners will give that person money, that claimant, it's up to them, but that's one of the factors they have to consider for the very reason that was raised yesterday, which should be raised, which is that President Trump, this Department of Justice, does not stand for assaulting law enforcement.
So we still don't have a clear answer. There's clearly not a, if you assaulted a cop, you can't apply. You can. It's the commissioners who, again, can be fired by Donald Trump, the president, at any moment. And they get to decide who this would be. We also have reporting now that the head of the Proud Boys is going to apply for this restitution.
Look, you can be very reluctant to say that nobody deserves restitution for things that happened in the Biden administration. I'm reluctant to say that, and also acknowledge that this is obviously a gimmick designed to advantage the president's political allies, not necessarily financially, but certainly ideologically. It's not just $1.8 billion, it's $1.776 billion, because it's definitely not a gimmick.
Well,
However,
he's tied it to the 250th anniversary, right?
Right. However, the president does have a point insofar as what he's doing is not necessarily unprecedented if you're talking about rewarding your ideological allies. What Joe Biden did at the very end of his presidency.
How did he reward his allies? Joe Biden?
Joe Biden? I'm about to tell you. At the end of his presidency, DOJ, an ethics attorney, in writing, said, Joe Biden, you cannot say that you have pardoned nonviolent drug offenders. It is, quote, untrue, at the very least misleading. And that's exactly what he did. He said, I'm going to flatten individuals, render them just an avatar of a tribe, and say you're pardoned and commuted, and this is all nonviolent drug offenders. It was not true. To say nothing of the fact that you had fraudsters, this Cuyahoga County guy, the cash for cars judge who was imprisoning judge. Leave that all aside.
But two wrongs make a right. I mean, let's assume that assume everything that you said is true.
It is true.
So let's assume that. How does that make what's happened we're talking about correct?
It doesn't. And what I'm frustrated by is the degree to which you hear from some on the left when you say things that are consistent. Oh, this is obfuscation. How does that make it right? No, what I'm saying is a consistent revulsion to the abridgment of procedure, of law, and the diminution of the rule of law in this country is something we should oppose wherever it comes from. And it came from the Biden administration.
You were comparing the Trump administration to the Biden administration, and I will say Joe Biden purposefully did not pick a attorney general that was going to do whatever he said. And frankly, we were criticized by the left on a lot of investigations because people thought we weren't bringing them too fast, because we weren't doing the
DOJ about what he was doing at the end of his term.
Let me tell you the process. The pardon attorney, their role is to make recommendations to the President of the United States on who should be pardoned. That is a recommendation. It is up to the President of the United States on who to pardon. Did the Justice Department know that Joe Biden was going to pardon his family? Absolutely not. Did the Justice Department know that Joe Biden was going to pardon the January 6th committee? Absolutely not. Would the Justice Department recommend that? Absolutely not. But that is very different.
You know better than
that is very different than the Attorney General of the United States, the Trump's personal lawyer, essentially negotiating a settlement with Donald Trump's attorney to help his allies and give $1.8 billion of taxpayer money to his friends.
And the procedure,
the Biden administration did not do that.
Yes, and the violation of the procedure is bad, and it's bad when the Biden administration does it and when the Trump administration does it. And you know better than I, Sochi, that in writing, the Justice Department said Joe Biden did not give members of Congress who sought to advise this process the time to have
I wonder if we could go back to what we're here to discuss, because it sounds to me like we may be in violent agreement. I don't hear anyone saying that this is not sort of a fig leaf for a settlement, that the plaintiff and the defendant were on the same side, and that there were valid arguments that the IRS could have asserted. So that seems like I don't hear anyone disagreeing with that's point one, which is the $1.776 billion is sort of conjured up as a way as a fig leaf to get that money. And I don't hear anyone saying that maybe there are some small quantum of people that, not just people in J6, but a whole range of people who could deserve restitution. But if you're planning on doing this wholesale, as the president just said in the clip you played, that this was a grave national injustice, and we're going to be paying all of their legal fees. And remember, he pardoned them all en masse. He did not do a triage. So I don't hear anyone here at the table saying that they would disagree with the commission saying, oh, you know what, we're going to give huge amounts of money to people who attacked police officers and did more than just trespass.
Right. It sounded like Todd Blanche was saying that that's not what the president wants, and he's on the record to say he's not supportive of anyone attacking a police officer. I just want to talk about the two officers who brought the lawsuit.
He did pardon.
He's already pardoned the people who attacked police officers.
There's a difference between pardoning them. They already did their jail time. So there's a difference between pardoning them.
They haven't done it all.
Okay, but they did 4 years ago, 3 years. The two officers who said they were bringing a lawsuit, and I'll defer to Andrew and my colleagues here, I don't think they have standing to bring a lawsuit. You have to be harmed. So the fact that there's money that's going to people that could harm them, there's not a controversy. To bring a case, there's got to be some controversy. It can't be, there might be a controversy. This might lead to somebody harming me. So I think on a summary judgment motion, if they bring that lawsuit, it'll be dismissed.
We have to go to break, but quick question just for my clarification. But what if they were there that day and were emotionally harmed? Does that count?
So I actually agree that the argument for standing, because it turns out, not every taxpayer could say, oh, I want to sue because you're using my taxpayer money. That's under the law. You would be basically opening up the courts to just myriad lawsuits. So here I agree that the reason that these people say they're individually hurt is pretty weak. So in terms of that's not the merits. That's just whether they have an individual stake.
You're talking about, standing.
Exactly. So it's a very procedural issue. It doesn't mean that this is correct. There are all sorts of other people who may sue who have better arguments for standing. But I agree that this lawsuit is maybe not the best in terms of seeing it go to the end of the day. But I think for the moment, I think we're going to see a political solution here rather than a legal solution.
All right. Up next, Senator.
What made this CNN segment so brutal for Republicans is that the deeper the conversation went, the harder it became to hide what this fund actually is. Because once you strip away all the MAGA talking points about weaponization and political persecution, what you are left with is a taxpayer-funded reward system for people connected to one of the darkest attacks on American democracy in modern history. And even some conservatives on that panel seemed to realize how indefensible it sounded. That's why you saw so much awkward hedging and lawyer-style word games from the MAGA defenders. They kept trying to narrow the conversation down to, well, some people only trespassed, or some people may have been overcharged. But that completely ignores the broader context of what January 6 actually was. This was not a random protest that got slightly out of hand. This was an attempt to stop the certification of a presidential election. A violent mob stormed the Capitol. Police officers were assaulted. Lawmakers were evacuated. People erected gallows outside the building. Crowds chanted about hanging the vice president. And now, years later, Donald Trump's administration is attempting to financially compensate people involved in that attack while simultaneously framing them as victims. That is an extraordinary thing for a government to do. And what made the panel discussion even more damaging for Republicans is that nobody could actually explain where the moral line is anymore. Because Todd Blanche refused to clearly rule out compensation for people who assaulted police officers. Think about how insane that is politically. The same Republican Party that spent years branding itself as the Back the Blue Party now cannot even straightforwardly say that individuals who beat police officers during January 6 should be permanently disqualified from receiving taxpayer money. That should tell people everything they need to know about how completely Trump has transformed the Republican Party. Because under normal political circumstances, this would not even be controversial. Republicans used to present themselves as the party of law enforcement, the party of personal responsibility, the party that believed criminals should face consequences for their actions. But Trumpism changed the rules. Now accountability depends entirely on political loyalty. If you commit violence in service of Trump, suddenly conservatives start searching for nuance. Suddenly they start talking about context. Suddenly they start questioning prosecutions. Suddenly people convicted in court become victims. And that hypocrisy becomes even more obvious when you compare how Republicans treated other protest movements. When Black Lives Matter protests happened, conservatives demanded mass arrests. They demanded harsher punishments. They demanded military force in some cases. They said anyone damaging property should face maximum accountability. But when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol itself, assaulted officers, and tried to overturn an election, now Republicans suddenly become deeply concerned about over-prosecution and prison conditions. That contradiction is impossible to ignore. And honestly, one of the most revealing moments from the panel came when one of the Republican guests tried to compare this situation to Biden pardons, because that has become the default MAGA strategy now. Anytime Trump is criticized, immediately pivot to, well, Democrats did something too. But even the panel dismantled that comparison almost instantly. There is a massive difference between a president using pardon powers, something constitutionally granted to presidents, and the attorney general, who also happens to be Trump's former personal lawyer, helping oversee a nearly $1.8 billion settlement mechanism that could directly benefit Trump-aligned political actors. Those are not remotely equivalent situations. And that's what makes this feel so corrosive institutionally, because the lines between the presidency, the Justice Department, Trump's private interests, and MAGA political loyalty are becoming completely blurred. The DOJ is supposed to represent the public interest, not Trump's personal grievances, not MAGA ideology, not political revenge. But increasingly under Trump, federal institutions appear to exist primarily to reward allies and punish enemies. And the symbolism of the exact dollar amount matters too. The panel touched on this briefly, but it deserves more attention. The number itself, $1.776 billion, is clearly designed as political theater. It's meant to wrap this entire operation in patriotic imagery tied to 1776 and the founding of the country. That's not accidental. It's branding. It's propaganda. It's an attempt to frame January 6 defendants as modern revolutionary figures rather than people who participated in an attack on democratic institutions. And that should disturb Americans regardless of party affiliation. Because what message does this send moving forward? What lesson are future extremists supposed to take from this? That if you commit political violence on behalf of the right political movement, you may eventually get pardoned and financially compensated? That is a catastrophically dangerous precedent. And the irony is overwhelming when you think about the actual victims here. More than 140 police officers were injured during January 6. Some suffered lasting trauma. Some still receive threats to this day. Harry Dunn and Daniel Hodges made that painfully clear during the segment. These are people who physically defended the Capitol during the attack, and now they are watching the federal government potentially reward individuals connected to the same mob that assaulted them. And according to the discussion, there is no serious effort to compensate those officers in the same way. That's the part that completely destroys the Republican back the blue branding. Because when forced to choose between loyalty to law enforcement and loyalty to Donald Trump, today's Republican Party chooses Trump every single time. And that's the transformation people are witnessing in real time. The Republican Party is no longer primarily organized around conservative ideology, constitutional principles, or traditional law and order politics. It is organized around personal loyalty to one man. That's why even obvious ethical concerns get rationalized away. That's why people humiliate themselves on television trying to defend things they clearly know look corrupt. And honestly, the most dangerous part may be how normalized this behavior is becoming. A few years ago, a president creating a massive compensation system for political allies tied to an attack on the Capitol would have caused immediate bipartisan outrage. Careers would have ended over this. Congressional investigations would dominate the news cycle nonstop. Now people debate it like it's just another ordinary partisan disagreement. That normalization is how democracies slowly erode. Not usually through one dramatic collapse, but through repeated moments where behavior that would once be considered shocking gradually becomes accepted as politically normal. And that's why this story matters beyond January 6th itself. This is about whether government institutions still belong to the public or whether they are becoming tools for protecting and rewarding political loyalists. Because once citizens stop believing justice is neutral, once they start believing laws only apply to some groups but not others, public trust begins collapsing very quickly. And that's the road America is dangerously moving down right now under Trumpism. A system where attacking democratic institutions can eventually make you a martyr. A system where political loyalty matters more than accountability. And a system where the people who defended democracy get trauma while the people who attacked it potentially get paid.